ends the cipher. Prepare for another all-nighter.
On the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON.
Tragic news from the NFL Friday. Sioux Falls, South Dakota police confirmed the 2-year-old son of Vikings running back Adrian Peterson has died. The boy was allegedly beaten by a boyfriend of the child's mother. That man, 27-year-old Joseph Robert Patterson, is now charged with aggravated assault and aggravated battery of an infant in the attack and faces more charges since the victim died.
Welcome back to the Sports Cipher. I'm Maya Khan with Farouk Basir. We're about to shift gears a little bit and talk about, I'm sure everybody knows about at this point, Adrian Peterson lost his 2-year-old son in an abuse case against with Joseph Patterson, who is the live-in boyfriend of the child's mother. They reside in South Dakota. And interesting enough, a lot of things unfolded with this story that I don't know that people were necessarily paying attention to. What I thought was interesting when I saw the story, Farouk, was that Adrian Peterson went to South Dakota because this happened on a Wednesday. Because remember, it was a 911 call that the little boy was choking. Paramedics arrive. Obviously, he's taken to the hospital. From there, it's determined that this is more of abuse because of the head trauma that was witnessed when he was brought into the ER, or even when the EMS got on scene. So Adrian Peterson goes out to South Dakota. And what's interesting is initially he wasn't even attached to the story because the little boy does not have his last name. Matter of fact, they didn't release his name. This was a very hush-hush thing. There was no ideas, at least from the people probably in the medical field, knowing that he was tied to this, and probably until he arrived. So he leaves the practice, he goes out to South Dakota, and pretty much returns back to Minnesota roughly a day or so later. And then it's determined that he's going to actually play in the game that happened today. So people are questioning, really should he have played? What I thought, like I said, what I thought was interesting in the story itself was that he went and he came right back. Now, the little boy did die on Friday. The injuries were so severe that he wasn't able to make it through it. So he did actually, unfortunately, he died on Friday. But now there's other things coming out in this story that there was a paternity case in place where, I'm going to say allegedly because this is not totally proven at this point, so I'm not going to say it's a reported fact. I think you should be responsible, that Adrian Peterson may not even have known it was his son until recently. So so I think that red flag about how could you possibly be back already when you just went, there's probably a little bit behind the fact that he didn't have this established relationship with the little boy. Matter of fact, for you were saying in our pre-preparation show is that there was a paternity. Like initially, I guess the girl thought it was somebody else's child.
Yeah.
And when that paternity came back negative, then she went to Adrian Peterson and said, "Oh, by the way, this is your son." Because I'm sure you do know he has 2 other children that actually reside with him in Minnesota. So it's a really, really sad story. And, it brought to light about Adrian Peterson that he really has this rocky road with losing loved ones. When he was 7, he lost his 11-year-old brother who was hit by a car, and he witnessed that act. Right before he goes into the NFL, like days before the combine, another half-brother was actually shot and killed. So he really is this person who's been mirrored in a lot of personal loss and depth. And I think for him, how he chose to approach this was, I'm going to play. He pretty much said, this is how I vent my anger, my sadness. This is the only way that I know how to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't blame him for playing. Based on all the circumstances and stuff that's being reported, it doesn't sound like he had that strong, honestly, of an emotional bond with this kid. For him to be like, well, I need to do this, this, and that. He showed his support by going out there immediately, going out there to the hospital in South Dakota and being there with his son, to see what was going on. But he didn't know. He had no idea about this kid. So, I mean, if people are thinking, well, you probably shouldn't have played today, Adrian, I think that would be an unfair stance to take against him.
Yeah, because plenty of players, like you talked about, remember when Brett Favre's father passed away, he played and had a phenomenal game. So it's not unheard of that athletes often will decide to be active and play because, like I said, for some people, it's a stress release. It helps them to focus. But I do think, like you said, I think part of this dynamic is this was a recent paternity case for him. He didn't. Joseph Patterson actually lived with the mother and the son. So, he didn't, it wasn't like it was a situation where this was a man who just beat this child and didn't have some form of relationship with him. We still don't know much about the mother. That kind of information really hasn't been released. If there's been, any previous abuse tied to this. But, I mean, and it's really sad. And, who knows? He may have returned home because he wanted to see his 2 living children. maybe that was something else that was, something that was going to console him.
I think this is more of a social issue. I think kind of what we teased on going into the break about athletes and, random women that lead to random children. I mean, it's more about that, I think, for this particular show. I think it's more about that than anything. Like, obviously, you heard stories of guys like Sean Kemp and who's the clown on Hard Knocks a couple years ago, or the NFL show?
Cromartie.
Antonio Cromartie. So you got guys like this with all these,
G5 and
all of that stuff.
Got to name all the kids. Can you name all of them?
I mean, while it's funny, it's also sad all at once. And in this situation, there's nothing funny about this. But, I mean, this is kind of a thing that kind of plagues not only athletes, but athletics are...
Just say it. Don't sugarcoat it. Say it.
All right, I'm going to say sports are a reflection of society. So this goes on a lot, in society. You know what I mean? So these guys who are out there in these leagues, NFL, NBA, NHL, I'm not going to leave them out either. MLB.
Tom Brady got baby mama.
Right. So all of these, sports, this is happening. This isn't just, an NFL or NBA thing. So it sucks when a kid dies, behind, guys' carelessness with these women.
And it's interesting
because that's really what it is. It's carelessness, because if he's a father and he didn't know, I mean, it's careless on her part for not finding something out like this much earlier. And then, there's only so much Peterson could do because he just found out. So it's a lot of this to me falls on the mother. But like 90% of it, probably more.
But here's the thing, though. Even if he would have known, it doesn't mean he could have changed the outcome of this, unfortunately.
Exactly.
I mean, the only difference would have been is he probably could have had a relationship with the child.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that he could have changed the outcome of this grown man who should have known never to put his hands on a child this way.
Exactly, because the mom is still going to have a boyfriend, even if he would have known the kid was born then, right when the kid popped out. If she goes and gets the boyfriend and Adrian Peterson has to go to practice and he's the most active father in the world, and this clown punk bastard is above the kid, it could still happen.
Your thoughts, when you heard about this story, were you appalled that he played? Your thoughts, 773-591-1690. Of course, you can give us your reactions on Twitter as well, at The Sports Cipher, or on our Facebook page, The Sports Cipher. It's just sad, and the one thing I always say, and I'm going to keep pushing, and if anybody has a child, a son who is going to be an athlete, I say this all the time. If I was an agent, my number one advice would be, we're going to take you to get a vasectomy for two reasons. One, you're not fathering children everywhere, because it's already kind of a pattern to show that it's just too difficult to not just dive into the ocean when the waves are so big. I mean, I'm just being honest.
You are so true.
I'm just being honest. I mean, there's a pattern, there's a cycle to this kind of behavior. So to think that you would hope your son wouldn't just impregnate or be irresponsible and have unprotected sex with random women, but it's happening. And it's happening, at epic rates at this point. So I would say we're going to go do this because, one, a vasectomy is reversible, and you're not fathering children that you're not part of their lives. And two, it's financial security that you're not paying child support to a bunch of different women, which will make you go broke. Do you really want to be paying $20,000 a month to somebody who's not your wife? I think if you just do the math on this, it just makes sense.
You had a whole lot of nodding heads.
Matter of fact, maybe I'll just shoot that email to Jay-Z real quick. Like, here's something you can do in your sports agent's job. How about you just recommend this? I mean, I know it probably seems like that seems like a really silly solution, but it makes a lot of sense to me because it's reversible.
This it goes back to knowing who you're with, not being so trusting, and it's all a product of broken homes, man. When it comes down to it, and it's broken because this particular home and homes that are like this, because when athletes father these kids, they're not going to stick around with these ladies. They're not going to stick around with these females. So that automatically is bringing kids into bad situations, because the woman is going to have some resentment of this athlete, that one, they're not with him. And if the guy isn't supporting them, financially, that's two. You know what I mean? So it just sucks. And all of that's going to be taken out on this kid. And then you got guys that will come into the situation, a boyfriend or some guy that they're messing around with, and you got so much jealousy and hating going on out here. They're going to find out, this whose kid? Y'all can't, and how you get to have her and do this and this and that. And there's so much jealousy and envy going on out here that people, I'm trying to keep it.
But no, you're right. You can take that down to an everyday level.
Yeah.
I often see in situations when I have to do assessments with people and there's children, let's say they're blended families, which means you're combining two different families together. Maybe a mother has a child, the father has a child, and they get
Right.
married.
Okay.
So blended families. A lot of times you will hear that the child flat out say, she doesn't like me or he doesn't like me.
Of the opposite
Yeah.
parent.
Of the opposite parent. Now whether that's warranted, you don't know. Sometimes it's just children feel that way, but it's not uncommon. But part of what the red flag about the mother for me was she didn't even know initially it was his child. She thought it was somebody else's. So that right there tells you who you're dealing with.
She's probably a groupie, no doubt.
You know, and remember, there are some people who are in the business of having children by athletes. It's a career for them because it becomes a very large paycheck. You know, and getting knocked up by Adrian Peterson can probably get you a really nice paycheck. You know, that's why he needs to be more cognizant. You need to make sure that you're more aware of what you do because you are a target for a lot of people. So, you know, there's this kind of behavior about people being abusive. Rather, there is some man may not just like your son because he's your son or it's your daughter. Because often the violence, which interesting enough, is perpetrated against the same gender. So say she had a daughter and the son, it's more likely a boyfriend will have an issue with the son opposed to the daughter. That's a very consistent pattern in abuse.
Because with that, they're trying to establish themselves as the dominant male in that
Mm-hmm.
house, and they want the boy raising up against them because it might not happen when they're a kid, but it's going to happen when they get a little older, and they're trying to instill in them right then and there when they're small that this is my house. It's really that simple.